At Greybridge Social, my stepmother's fist landed under the chandelier, right where the ceiling camera blinks red. I wiped my lip, leaned toward the mic on my necklace, and whispered, 8:17 p.m. Thank you for the timestamp. They thought I'd swallow it like I always do. They forgot I'm the one who filed every affidavit that brought her here, and the one who writes the rules for people who think they're above them. My name is Nora Kincaid. I am 32 years old, and for the last 18 months, I have been the acting chief operating officer of Archwell Dynamics, the company my father built and my mother's legacy secured. Tonight, we are dining at Greybridge Social, the crown jewel of Everlyn Crest's culinary scene, a place designed to make power feel comfortable. The light here is the color of old money, a warm golden haze that pools on dark wood tables and glints off the crystal glasses. The air hums with the low thrum of discreet conversations, the soft clinking of silver against porcelain, the whisper of a sommelier suggesting a vintage. Our table, the best in the house, is tucked into a semi-private alcove, offering a panoramic view of the main dining room while shielding us from its direct gaze. A perfect stage. I am seated between my father, Richard Kincaid, CEO of Archwell, and his wife, Sable. The performance had begun the moment we were seated. Sable, resplendent in a sapphire dress that probably cost more than the waiter's monthly salary, orchestrated the evening with the casual tyranny she had perfected. She sent back a bottle of wine my father had selected, not because it was flawed, but to demonstrate that she could. She corrected the pronunciation of Gewürztraminer for the young server, her voice a condescending caress. I watched, my expression neutral, my hands resting in my lap. I was a study in corporate stillness, the gray silk of my blouse a deliberate counterpoint to her vibrant cruelty. Her attention eventually turned to me, as it always did. The initial salvos were subtle, meant to be felt rather than heard by the staff who drifted in and out of our orbit. A comment about my work first, life later approach, a sigh about how I must be so lonely with my dedication to the company. My father shifted in his seat, the leather of the banquette groaning in protest. He hated these moments, but was constitutionally incapable of stopping them. He preferred the illusion of peace over the messy reality of confrontation. The waiter, a young man with nervous eyes, returned to top up our water. It was then that Sable leaned in close, the scent of her expensive perfume, something with notes of jasmine and malice, washing over me. Her voice dropped to a theatrical whisper, loud enough for the waiter to catch every syllable. "You have to forgive her," Sable said, gesturing toward me with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "She's the definition of dead weight, inherited a position she could never earn. We all have our burdens to carry." The waiter froze, his hand trembling slightly as he held the pitcher. His eyes darted to mine, filled with a mixture of pity and fear. I offered him nothing. My gaze was fixed on Sable. The air in our alcove grew thick and cold. My father cleared his throat, a pathetic, rumbling sound of denial. And then it happened. Not with a shout, not with a warning, just a sudden, violent shift in the atmosphere. Sable's smile tightened. Her eyes flashed with a feral light, and her right hand, adorned with a heavy diamond-flanked sapphire ring that matched her dress, shot across the table. Her fist connected with my left cheekbone. A solid, shocking impact. The force of it snapped my head to the side. A sharp, metallic taste filled my mouth. For a split second, the ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking glasses, the murmured conversations, seemed to fall away into a vacuum of stunned silence. My first conscious thought was not of pain, but of logistics. I slowly lifted my head, ignoring the throbbing that was beginning to bloom under my skin. My eyes bypassed Sable's triumphant sneer, bypassed my father's horrified, frozen face. I looked up, finding exactly what I was searching for. The small, black dome of the ceiling-mounted security camera, its tiny red light blinking with methodical consistency, an impartial witness. My right hand, hidden below the line of the table, moved to the silver pendant resting against my collarbone. It was a simple, elegant piece of jewelry, a brushed metal disc on a delicate chain. To the world, it was a modern accessory. To me, it was a microphone. I pressed the almost invisible indentation on its side. My left hand came up to my mouth, my thumb gently swiping at the corner of my lip. It came away with a smear of blood. "Don't you dare make a scene! Nora," my father finally managed to hiss, his voice low and panicked. He reached for Sable's arm, a futile attempt to retroactively restrain her. He wasn't looking at me. He never looked at me in these moments. He looked at the potential disruption, the threat to his carefully curated image of a perfect family, a stable empire. I ignored him. My focus was absolute, in my mind. A silent countdown began. 3, the system initializing, establishing a secure connection to the cloud server I had built. 2, the indicator light on the pendant, visible only from a direct downward angle, was amber. 1, it flickered and turned a steady, soft green. Recording. The commotion, however brief, had not gone unnoticed. The restaurant manager, a tall man named Julian whose posture was a permanent apology, scurried toward our table. His face was pale, his hands clasped together in a gesture of frantic placation. "Mr. Kincaid, Mrs. Kincaid, is everything all right?" he stammered, his eyes wide as he took in the scene, the palpable tension, the blood on my thumb. I spoke before anyone else could, my voice perfectly level, betraying none of the cold fury solidifying in my chest. "Everything is fine. Julian, however, I will need a detailed, itemized copy of our bill. Please ensure it includes a timestamp for every order placed at this table, from 6:45 p.m. until 8:30 p.m., precisely." He blinked, confused by the specificity, but relieved to be given a task. "Of course, Ms. Kincaid, right away." He practically fled. Beneath the table, my fingers moved across the screen of my phone. I opened a secure messaging app, selected a single contact, our firm's most discreet and loyal in-house counsel, and typed one word: live. I hit send. A single gray checkmark appeared, then immediately turned blue. Message received. Sable watched me, a contemptuous smirk playing on her lips. The adrenaline of her assault had left her feeling invincible. "Making a phone call? Who are you going to tell? Your imaginary friends?" I met her gaze, my own eyes cold and clear. "The right person," I said, the words clipped and precise. I picked up the heavy linen napkin from my lap. I pressed it gently to my lip, holding it there for a moment before lowering it. A small, perfect red stain blossomed on the crisp white fabric. I folded the napkin deliberately, placing it beside my plate. Then, I smoothed the front of my silk blouse, adjusted my posture, and picked up my water glass, taking a slow, measured sip. As far as any casual observer was concerned, nothing had ever happened. The performance was over. The recording had begun. My response to Sable's assault wasn't born in the heat of that moment at Greybridge Social. It was executed there, but it was forged here, within the sterile, climate-controlled walls of the Archwell Dynamics headquarters. My world is one of glass and steel, of quarterly reports and risk assessments. It's a world Sable never bothered to understand, and that ignorance was her most critical vulnerability. My revenge would not be a shouted rebuttal in a restaurant. It would be a line item in an audit report, a clause in a contract, a motion raised in a board meeting. The groundwork was laid 18 months ago, long before the CSR department became her personal fiefdom. As acting COO, my first major initiative was the complete overhaul of our procurement and payables system. I introduced what I blandly titled the Vendor Integrity Program. On the surface, it was a tedious but necessary piece of corporate governance, designed to protect us from supply chain disruptions and regulatory fines. I sold it to the board with charts and projections, using phrases like proactive compliance and stakeholder assurance. They approved it unanimously, pleased with my boring, sensible diligence. In reality, the VIP was a weapon in waiting. At its core was a new, mandatory protocol. Every single vendor, contractor, and consultant, before receiving a single dollar from Archwell, had to be run through a rigorous, automated conflict of interest scan. The system cross-referenced corporate registration databases, property records, and our own HR files. It was designed to flag any connection, no matter how tenuous, between a vendor and an Archwell employee or their known associates. It was a digital net, and I was the only one who knew just how fine the mesh was. While that system was being implemented publicly, I was building another one in private. I wrote a simple script that ran every night at 3:00 a.m. It accessed the company's raw transactional data, isolated every expenditure made on a corporate card assigned to the CSR department, and duplicated it into an encrypted, off-network database. I called it the Shadow Ledger. It was my private, annotated record of Sable's kingdom. While the official accounting software just showed a vendor name and an amount, my ledger included context. I tagged expenditures that corresponded with her personal travel calendar. I made notes on invoices that were approved at odd hours. It was a silent, meticulous accounting of her escalating greed. For months, the data was predictable, outrageous, yes, but within the bounds of what she could dismiss as departmental expenses. Designer dresses were coded as gala supplies. Spa treatments were wellness consultations for donors. Then, 3 months ago, an alert triggered. A series of 3 large identical payments, each one just under the $50,000 threshold that required executive co-approval, were made to a vendor not on the pre-approved list. The vendor's name was Brindleport Strategic Solutions, LLC. The invoice description was a single, vague line, PR Consulting Commission. The name was new, and the location, Brindleport, was a sleepy coastal town 100 miles away, not a hub for high-powered PR firms. My system flagged it instantly. In the official records, it was just another payment. In my shadow ledger, it was a flashing red light. The investigation took me less than an hour, conducted in the quiet of my office long after the building had emptied. A search of the state's public business registry showed Brindleport Strategic Solutions, LLC, had been incorporated just 4 weeks prior. The registered agent and sole listed officer was a young woman named Amelia Vance. A quick search of Archwell's HR database confirmed my suspicion. Amelia Vance was Sable's newest personal assistant, a bright-eyed 24-year-old who was either a willing accomplice or a terrified pawn. The next step was to find where the money was going. The payment records showed an account at a small regional bank. A deeper, more legally ambiguous search using a private investigation service I kept on retainer gave me the details of that account. The address associated with the account holder was not in Brindleport. It was a downtown Everland Crest apartment. A final cross-reference with my own personal files, the files from 5 years ago, confirmed the kill. It was the exact address of the furnished apartment I had rented for Sable while her visa was being processed. Before she married my father and moved into our lives, she was funneling company money through her assistant into a shell LLC, which then paid it out to a personal account tied to her past. It was sloppy. It was arrogant. It was perfect. An open accusation would have been a mistake. It would have become a messy domestic drama. My word against the CEO's wife. My father would have demanded proof, then found a way to dismiss it. I needed something cold, impersonal, and irrefutable. I needed an audit. The next morning, I issued a memo to the heads of finance and CSR. I announced the launch of a pilot program to test new, AI-driven auditing software. It was a beautiful piece of corporate misdirection, filled with jargon about enhancing fiscal transparency and leveraging machine learning to identify workflow inefficiencies. Sable's CSR department, I explained, had been selected for the pilot due to its dynamic and varied expenditure profile. It sounded like an honor. She didn't even read the full memo, just replied with a terse, "Fine," likely annoyed at the bureaucratic intrusion. The audit was real, but the software was just a smokescreen. The real work was done by me, in conjunction with a man named David Sterling. David was the senior partner at the external firm that handled Archwell's annual audits. A few years ago, a junior member of his team had made a colossal error that could have cost the firm its reputation and a great deal of money. I found the mistake before anyone else did, buried deep in a subsidiary's ledger. I could have exposed it. Instead, I called David directly, explained the situation discreetly, and allowed him to correct it quietly. He never forgot it. He owed me a professional debt, the kind that is never spoken of but always understood. I called David and explained the pilot program. I told him what I needed: a thorough, by-the-book examination of CSR's finances for the last 6 months, with a special focus on new vendors and weekend transactions. Over the course of my own review, I had flagged 11 specific transactions, including the 3 Brindleport payments, that had been processed on Saturdays or Sundays. These were times when the regular salaried accounting staff were home. The payments had been approved by a junior, contract-based clerk who worked weekends and likely felt pressured to approve anything that came from the CEO's wife without question. It was a clear pattern of exploiting a systemic weak point. David listened, the silence on his end of the line conveying his complete understanding. "When do you need the report?" he asked. "There's no rush," I told him, my voice calm and even. "I want it to be thorough. I want it to be airtight. Wait for the right moment. I'll let you know when that is." He knew exactly what I meant. This wasn't just about finding fraud. It was about deploying the findings with maximum impact. An audit report landing on a random Tuesday would be a problem for Sable. The same report landing in the middle of a crisis would be a catastrophe. For 2 months, David's team worked quietly. I received weekly encrypted updates. They confirmed everything I already knew and uncovered more. A web of fake invoices, inflated expenses, and kickbacks. The Brindleport LLC was just the tip of the iceberg. The final report was a ticking bomb, locked in David's digital vault, waiting for my signal. I planned for the signal to be the annual shareholders' meeting, which was 2 weeks away. I would leak the audit's findings to the board's independent directors the night before, creating a firestorm that would engulf Sable and force my father's hand. It would be a clean, corporate execution. But Sable, in her infinite arrogance, decided to accelerate the timeline. She decided to raise her hand to me at a family dinner, under the watchful, impartial eye of a security camera. She thought it was a display of power. She had no idea she was simply stepping onto a stage I had already built, hitting a mark I had already set. That slap wasn't the start of the war. It was the perfect, clarifying, beautifully documented moment I had been waiting for. It was the signal. The car ride back to my apartment was silent. My father drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, the air in the car thick with his unspoken demand for me to apologize, to smooth over the jagged edges of the evening. Sable, in the passenger seat, hummed a self-satisfied little tune, her victory at the restaurant still warming her. She had drawn blood, and in her world, that was the end of the game. They dropped me at my downtown condo, a sleek, impersonal building of glass and steel far from the family estate in Everlyn Heights. My father's last words to me were a tired, frustrated sigh. "Just try to make this right, Nora, for the family." I didn't reply. I just closed the car door, the solid, expensive thunk serving as my only answer. I walked into the lobby, the throb in my cheek, a dull, steady pulse, a physical reminder of the task at hand. The battle was far from over. It had just officially begun. My apartment is my sanctuary, a place of cool neutrals, hard surfaces, and controlled order. There is no clutter, no sentiment. It is a machine for living. And tonight, it was a war room. I didn't bother with the lights. I walked through the dark, the city lights of Everlyn Crest painting long geometric patterns on the polished concrete floor, and went straight to my home office. I sat in my chair, the ergonomic mesh cold against my back, and powered on my workstation. Not my corporate-issued laptop, but my personal, secure tower, air-gapped from the Archwell network, protected by biometric security and a level of encryption that would make our IT department weep. My first act was to retrieve the audio, I unclaced the silver pendant from my neck. It was warm from my skin. I connected its proprietary charging cable, a simple USB-C, to a port on my machine. A new drive appeared on my desktop. The file was there, time-stamped and clear. Audio out at 8:17 p.m., FLAC. I played back the critical moment. My own voice, quiet, steady, cutting through the ambient restaurant noise. 8:17 p.m., thank you for the timestamp. Followed by the crystal-clear audio of Sable's sneering. Making a phone call? Who are you going to tell? And my reply, the right person, perfect. The second piece arrived at 10:52 p.m., a notification from the secure courier service I use. A slim, encrypted drive was waiting in my building's smart lock package room. My text. Live. To our in-house counsel. Arthur Vance. Had not been a cry for help. It was an activation order. Arthur, a man of profound discretion who owed his current position to my recommendation, would have immediately contacted Greybridge Social's legal department. He wouldn't have threatened. He would have simply stated that a security incident involving an Archwell executive occurred on their premises at approximately 8:17 p.m., and that immediate preservation and transfer of all relevant footage from camera C07, main dining alcove, was required to mitigate corporate liability. The restaurant's manager, Julian, who had already witnessed the tension, would have folded instantly. Their lawyers would have advised immediate compliance. The footage, I knew, would be silent, as restaurant cameras rarely record audio for privacy reasons. I slotted the new drive into my workstation. Greybridge C07 2000 to 2100.4. I opened the file. The high-angle shot was grainy, the colors washed out by the chandelier, but the action was unmistakable. There we were, 3 figures at a table. I watched the scene unfold in clinical silence. I saw Sable lean in. I saw her hand move in a blur. I saw my head snap to the side. I saw my father's pathetic, aborted motion. I saw myself look up, directly into the camera. I opened a simple editing suite. I imported the video file and the audio file. I aligned them, using the visual impact of the punch as my first sync point and my own whispered timestamp as the second. I layered the high-fidelity audio from my pendant over the silent, grainy video. The result was chilling. You could hear the clink of silverware, my father's throat clearing, and then, with horrifying clarity, the smack of Sable's ring against my face, followed by her taunts and my cold replies. It was no longer a grainy, ambiguous video. It was a complete, undeniable record of assault. I exported the final file. Incident 8:07 p.m. synced, MP4. Now for the delivery. I opened a secure portal to the Archwell corporate mainframe. I navigated to a system I had personally designed and commissioned 2 years prior, under the guise of an updated Sarbanes-Oxley compliance tool. We called it the Ethics Vault. It was a digital lockbox, a system built on blockchain principles. Once a file was uploaded and certified with a unique hash, it was immutable. It could not be altered. It could not be deleted. Not even by me. Not even by the system administrator. It was a permanent, auditable record, a digital break glass in case of emergency for matters of the highest corporate sensitivity. I uploaded Incident 8:07 p.m. synced MP4 to the vault. The system Word processed the file and generated a hash key. It was now part of Archwell's permanent record. I then opened the simple text-based complaint form. Name of filer, Nora Kincaid, COO, acting. Date of incident, October 19th, 2025, 8:17 p.m. Location of incident, Greybridge Social. Everlyn Crest, business-related function. Parties involved, Nora Kincaid, Richard Kincaid, CEO. Sable Kincaid, head of CSR. Subject of complaint. I typed the words carefully, each one a legal landmine. Workplace-adjacent violence by a senior family member with fiduciary influence. Details. At the time and date specified, Sable Kincaid physically assaulted me in a public setting during a dinner discussion related to corporate matters. The act was unprovoked and witnessed by the CEO. This incident represents a severe breach of the company's code of conduct, constitutes a hostile work environment, and demonstrates a pattern of behavior that puts the company's reputation and assets at severe risk. I attached the hash key for the video file, linking it directly to the complaint. I then created a new email. This email would not go to a general compliance box. It would not go to HR. It would go to 3 people, and 3 people only. The targets were chosen with surgical precision. 2. James Abernathy, the independent chairman of the board, a former federal judge, a man with zero tolerance for corporate drama and an ironclad belief in governance. He detested my father's family-first style of management. David Sterling, the head of external audit, the man who owed me. He was already holding the financial bomb, waiting for my signal. This was it. Eleanor Vance, no relation to the assistant, the board's general counsel. Arthur Vance, my in-house contact, reported to her. She was a brilliant, ruthless lawyer whose entire career was built on protecting the corporation from liability. An assault by a corporate officer's wife, witnessed by the CEO who did nothing, was a shareholder lawsuit waiting to happen. Attachments. CSR Expenditure Lot Analysis Q3 Q4. PDF. The executive summary of the shadow ledger, showing the Brindleport LLC, the fake invoices, and the clear line of fraud. AP8 email chain re Brindleport. Bought PDF. The chain of emails from Sable's assistant, Amelia Vance, pressuring the weekend accounting clerk to, "Please just push this through. Sable needs it done before Monday." A clear violation of payment protocols. Ethics Vault Receipt 8:07 p.m. Text. The immutable hash key and access link for the video file. They wouldn't even need to download it. They could stream it directly from our most secure server. The body of the email was brief, almost insultingly so. It offered no emotion, no pleading, no personal narrative. James, David, Eleanor. Per our corporate governance and ethics policies, I am formally lodging a high-priority report in the Ethics Vault. See attached receipt. The attached financial analysis, Attachment 1, and procedural violations, Attachment 2, from the CSR department, which I had been compiling for the pre-shareholder meeting audit, now require immediate context. The attached vault file provides that context. This is no longer a matter of mere financial impropriety. It is a demonstrable pattern of intimidation and instability that has now escalated to physical violence, creating significant and immediate fiduciary risk. I paused, my finger hovering over the mouse. I moved to the subject line and typed 2 words. 2 words that would chill their blood and erase any possibility of them dismissing this, of them waiting until morning, or forming a committee. Subject. For the avoidance of doubt. It was a legal term, a phrase used in contracts to clarify a point and prevent misinterpretation. Here, it was a threat. It meant, you know there is a problem. I know you know. You can no longer pretend you don't. Plausible deniability is now revoked. I hit send. The time was 11:43 p.m. I didn't move. I stared at the blank screen. The only sound in the room, the faint hum of the server rack in my closet. The wait began. This was the moment of greatest risk. If they hesitated, if they decided to protect my father, if they saw this as a power grab. At 11:47 p.m., David Sterling's icon flashed. A new email. From David Sterling. Subject. For the avoidance of doubt. Body. Nora, I am forwarding my team's complete, finalized audit report to Abernathy and Vance immediately. It will be on their desks. You have my full support. At 12:09 a.m., Eleanor Vance's reply. From Eleanor Vance. Subject. For the avoidance of doubt. Body. I have reviewed the vault file. I am convening an emergency session with outside counsel at 7 a.m. to prepare a temporary restraining order and articles of suspension, pending a full board vote. At 12:14 a.m., the one that mattered. From James Abernathy. Subject: Re. For the avoidance of doubt. Body: We convene at 9 a.m., boardroom A. Bring the tape, and bring your father. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. It was done. The mechanism was in motion. I picked up my phone, the screen bright in the dark room. I opened my message thread with my father. His last message to me was still there. Just try to make this right. Nora. I typed my reply. I will be at the office for a 9 a.m. meeting with the chairman. He expects you to be there. I sent it. He would see it. He would panic. He would call Sable. They would scramble. Try to spin a narrative. Try to paint me as hysterical, as vindictive. But it was too late. While they were still playing at the dinner table, I had already moved the battle to the boardroom. Sable, probably now asleep in my mother's bed, had no idea that her world had just been served with an eviction notice. I slept for 3 hours. It wasn't the deep, restorative sleep of the innocent, but the dreamless, efficient shutdown of a machine that has completed a critical process and is now conserving energy for the next. I woke at 4:30 a.m., before the first hint of dawn had touched the sky over Everlyn Crest. The city was a grid of dormant lights below. In my inbox, the 3 emails from Abernathy, Sterling, and Vance sat like pillars of a new reality. Their replies weren't just acknowledgments. They were the sound of tumblers clicking into place in a lock I had been building for years. This was never about a single video or a single audit. A lone piece of evidence can be dismissed, spun, buried. This was about activating a network. Not a network of cronies or conspirators, but of professionals bound by the quiet, unglamorous currencies of integrity and competence. My power was never going to be the inherited kind my father wielded, or the manipulative kind Sable mimicked. My power was the sum of debts I never intended to collect, the result of investments in other people's principles. My mind went to David Sterling. 4 years ago, Archwell was in the process of acquiring a smaller tech firm. David's company was handling the due diligence. A junior analyst on his team, overworked and inexperienced, missed a significant liability in the target company's pension fund, a multi-million-dollar error hidden in arcane actuarial tables. The deal was days from closing. My father, eager for the acquisition, was pushing for a swift, clean signature. The pressure on David's firm to deliver a clean report was immense. I found the error by chance. While reviewing the raw data on a Saturday morning, I saw the potential fallout: a disastrous acquisition for Archwell, a career-ending scandal for David, a ruined young analyst. I didn't go to my father. I didn't go to the board. I called David's personal cell phone at 7 a.m. I walked him through the numbers, line by line. I didn't accuse. I questioned. David, can you help me understand this projection? Together, we drafted a confidential addendum. I presented it to my father not as an error, but as a stress test of the data that revealed a strategic opportunity for renegotiation. We adjusted the purchase price. The deal went through successfully, and Archwell saved $8 million. David's firm was protected, and the junior analyst never knew how close he had come to catastrophe. David and I never spoke of it again. We didn't need to. He understood that I valued the integrity of the numbers over the speed of the deal. He knew I had saved him, not for personal gain, but because it was the correct, orderly thing to do. His immediate support last night was not a favor. It was the balancing of a scale. Then there was Eleanor Vance, the board's general counsel. My relationship with her was older, forged not in a boardroom, but a classroom. She was an adjunct professor for my evening MBA program, teaching a seminar on corporate ethics. She was brilliant, incisive, and unimpressed by the sons and daughters of privilege who populated her class. I was her research assistant. During that semester, a rival from her old law firm, vying for the same promotion to partner, anonymously accused her of plagiarizing a section of a law review article. The university launched a quiet, internal inquiry. It was a baseless smear, but a damaging one. Eleanor was distraught, the accusation threatening to derail her career. I spent 48 straight hours in the law library's digital archives, tracing the evolution of the legal theory in question. I found the original source of the plagiarized text, a judicial opinion from the 1970s that was now considered common legal parlance. Quoted without attribution in dozens of subsequent articles by respected scholars, I compiled a 20-page report, complete with citations and a timeline, that not only exonerated Eleanor but proved the accusation was made in malicious bad faith. I gave it to her, and she used it to end the inquiry and, I later heard, the career of her accuser. She offered to pay me, to give me a special credit. I refused. "You taught us to follow the facts," I said. "That's all I did." She saw then that I wasn't just a student who knew the rules, but someone who believed in them. And finally, James Abernathy, the chairman of the board. With James, there was no single dramatic event. He was a man who had spent 30 years on a federal bench. He had seen every form of human drama and deceit. He was immune to charm and allergic to bullshit. He had been a skeptic of my father's leadership style for years, viewing him as too impulsive, too focused on the optics of success. I won James's respect not in a crisis, but in the mundane, week-to-week business of the company. I did it with my quarterly reports, which were always delivered on time, with appendixes that anticipated his questions. I did it in board meetings, where my presentations were devoid of hyperbole, grounded in data, and focused on risk mitigation, while my father spoke in grand visions. I spoke of process, governance, and shareholder value. I was predictable. I was orderly. I was, to a man like James Abernathy, a bastion of sanity in a family-run company he increasingly distrusted. I had never asked him for a thing. I just did my job with the quiet, relentless competence he valued above all else. When my email arrived, with its payload of violence, fraud, and a clear-headed appeal to fiduciary duty, it wasn't a plea from a wronged daughter. It was a report from the only executive he truly trusted. These people were my safety net. The slow, patient work of years, the quiet coffees, the brief, "just checking in, hope you're well," emails, the sharing of an interesting industry article. They weren't just networking, they were acts of professional maintenance, reinforcing alliances built not on emotion, but on a shared code. I never asked them to choose my side against my family. I simply created a situation where the facts, the rules, and their own professional principles would force them to. The truth was on my side. So they were too. At 8:15 a.m., I stood before the mirror in my bedroom. The bruise on my cheekbone had blossomed overnight, a ugly purple and blue smear against my pale skin. I applied a thin layer of concealer, not to hide it completely, but to dull the color, to make it look less like a wound and more like a piece of evidence. I dressed in a charcoal gray suit, a white silk shirt, my armor of corporate neutrality. The 27th floor of the Archwell Tower houses the executive boardroom. Its outer wall is a single pane of glass with a commanding view of the city, a view meant to remind everyone in the room of the scope of their power. I arrived at 8:50 a.m. The room was empty except for Eleanor Vance, who stood by the window, a tablet in her hand. She nodded at me, her expression grim but resolute. On the long, polished mahogany table, a small triangular Polycom unit was already active. Its small indicator light was green. Recording. Every word spoken in this room from this moment on would be part of the official corporate record. Sable arrived at 8:57 a.m. She swept in, a vision in a cream-colored Chanel suit, a brilliant smile fixed on her face. She was performing the role of the confident, unbothered executive wife. She saw me. Her eyes flicking to my cheek, the smile tightened. "Nora, darling," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Are you all right? You look exhausted." She believed this meeting was about me. She believed my father had called in the chairman to manage his hysterical daughter. My father arrived at 9:02 a.m., late. He looked haggard, his face pale, his suit slightly rumpled as if he had slept in it. He avoided my eyes, giving a weak nod to Eleanor before taking his seat at the head of the table. James Abernathy entered right behind him, followed by David Sterling. They didn't speak. just took their seats, their faces impassive masks of judicial gravity. The trap was set. The players were in place. I waited until they were all seated, the silence in the room growing heavy and thick. Then, I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. I took out a small, slim object, a silver USB drive, cool and smooth to the touch. I stood up, leaned over the vast, polished expanse of the table, and placed it with a soft click directly in the center, equidistant from everyone. It was the only object on the table besides the recording unit. It was small, unassuming, and contained the complete and total destruction of Sable's world. I sat back down, folded my hands, and waited. James Abernathy did not waste time on pleasantries. He tapped the surface of the mahogany table, a single, sharp rap of his knuckle that drew every eye. The green light on the recording unit seemed to brighten. "This is an emergency session of the independent directors and legal counsel of the Archwell Dynamics Board," he began, his voice the dry, authoritative rasp of a man who had presided over countless hearings. "The time is 9:03 a.m., October 20th. The record will reflect that all invited parties are present. Ms. Kincaid," he said, turning his gaze to me. "You have the floor." I didn't stand. I reached forward, took the silver USB drive, and inserted it into the port at the center of the table's integrated media hub. With a few clicks on the control panel, the 80-inch screen that dominated the far wall flickered to life. It showed a simple file directory. I selected Incident 8:07 p.m. synced MP4 and pressed play. The room was plunged into the world of Greybridge Social. The video was grainy, shot from above, but the audio was pristine. We heard the clinking of glasses, the low hum of conversation. We saw the three of us at the table. We heard Sable's voice, laced with condescending venom, calling me dead weight. And then, we saw her hand lash out. The sound was sickeningly clear in the silent, acoustically perfect boardroom. A sharp, wet smack, followed by a collective, invisible flinch from everyone at the table except me. The camera captured my head snapping to the side, my father's frozen in action. Then, my own voice, a controlled whisper amplified by the pendant mic, filled the room. 8:17 p.m. Thank you for the timestamp. I pressed pause, leaving the image of my bruised face, tilted up towards the camera, frozen on the screen. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. My father stared at his hands, his face a mask of gray shame. David Sterling and Eleanor Vance watched the screen, their expressions unreadable, but intensely focused. It was Sable who broke the silence, with a laugh. It was a brittle, high-pitched sound that shattered the tension and replaced it with something ugly. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Is that what this is about? A little family squabble? James, I apologize that you were dragged into this. It's a private, domestic matter. Nora has always been overly dramatic." Her attempt to frame it as hysteria was her first and last mistake of the meeting. "It ceases to be a domestic matter." "Sable," I said, my voice cutting through her performance like glass. I turned to Abernathy. "It ceases to be a domestic matter when the instigator is a corporate officer, the head of the CSR department, and the act of violence is a direct result of a discussion about her performance in that role. It is no longer a domestic matter when it is part of a pattern of intimidation that involves corporate assets and corporate personnel." I clicked the remote. The video vanished, replaced by the first slide of a new presentation. It was the Articles of Incorporation for Brindleport Strategic Solutions, LLC. Sable's smile faltered. "What is this?" I didn't answer her. I nodded to David Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, if you would." David leaned forward, his voice the calm, dispassionate tone of an auditor stating facts. "Brindleport Strategic Solutions is a limited liability company established 4 weeks ago. Its sole officer is an Archwell employee, Ms. Amelia Vance, who reports directly to Ms. Sable Kincaid. Over the past 3 weeks, Archwell's CSR department has paid this LLC $147,000 in PR consulting commissions. I clicked again. A flowchart appeared on the screen. A clean, damning visualization of the money trail. It showed the payments from Archwell's account to Brindleport's regional bank account, and then immediate, subsequent transfers of nearly the exact same amounts to a personal checking account. At the end of the trail was a name and an address, Sable's maiden name, and the address of her premarital apartment. Sable stared at the screen, her face paling. That's a lie. My assistant handles the vendors. I don't get involved in the specifics. The specifics are quite clear, David continued, his tone unyielding. I advanced the slide. A screenshot of Archwell's digital payment portal appeared. It showed the final approval for one of the Brindleport payments. Highlighted in red was the digital signature and timestamp. This payment was approved at 11:38 p.m. on a Saturday, using the credentials of a junior accounts payable clerk. However, our IT security logs show the IP address of the computer that authorized the payment. It was not at the clerk's home. It was registered to the home Wi-Fi network of Ms. Amelia Vance. Another click. The screen now showed a side-by-side comparison. On the left was Amelia Vance's work schedule, showing her out of the office on that Saturday. On the right was Sable's corporate calendar for the same day. It showed a single entry: Charity Strategy Lunch, Brindleport. Convenient, I murmured, just loud enough for the Polycom to pick it up. This is slander, Sable finally exploded, her voice rising. You're twisting things. James Abernathy held up a hand. The room fell silent again. He didn't look at Sable. He didn't look at me. He looked at my father. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. Richard, the board is looking at evidence of financial fraud and an act of physical violence perpetrated by your wife, a department head. The question is simple. Were you aware of any of this? My father did not move. The seconds stretched into an eternity. He slowly lifted his head, and his eyes met mine across the polished table. In them, I saw a desperate, pathetic appeal. He wanted me to stop this, to save him from this. I gave him nothing. My expression was a flat, unforgiving wall. He broke contact first, his gaze dropping to the glossy surface of the table, as if he could find an answer in his own reflection. He remained silent. The board notes Mr. Kincaid's silence, Abernathy said, his tone devoid of emotion. He turned to Eleanor Vance. Eleanor, our legal position? Unequivocal, she stated, her voice sharp and precise. We have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders to act. Failure to do so, now that the board has been formally notified, would open us to catastrophic liability. We are obligated to launch a full, independent investigation, effective immediately. I agree, I said, speaking into the silence. And as part of that investigation, to ensure its integrity, I recommend the board places Ms. Sable Kincaid on an immediate, mandatory leave of absence. I paused, letting the words sink in. Furthermore, she must be put under a strict no-contact order. She is to have no communication with any Archwell employee, no access to any company property, systems, or assets, pending the outcome of the investigation. Sable shot out of her chair, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You bitch!" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You will regret this for the rest of your life." I met her glare without flinching. "I have had regrets." "Sable," I said, my voice colder than I had ever heard it. "I regretted being the one who had to compile, translate, and sign the affidavits of financial support that brought you to this country. I regretted giving you the decency of a legal foundation that you have so clearly forgotten how to appreciate." A sharp intake of breath from my father was the only sound. Sable looked as if I had just slapped her. The color drained from her face. James Abernathy cleared his throat, a sound like gravel turning over. "The motion is on the table, all in favor of suspending Ms. Sable Kincaid's privileges and access at Archwell Dynamics and initiating a no-contact order and independent investigation." Abernathy raised his hand. Eleanor raised hers. David Sterling. as an outside consultant, abstained, but gave a firm, decisive nod. "The motion carries," Abernathy declared. He looked directly at Sable, who was still standing, trembling with fury. "Ms. Kincaid, your corporate access has been revoked, effective immediately. Security will meet you at your office to supervise the collection of your personal effects. You are to leave the premises and have no further contact with this company's staff." The large digital clock on the wall read 9:37 a.m. The sound that followed Abernathy's verdict was not a gavel, but something just as final. The coordinated, sharp click of 3 executive pens, uncapped and put to paper, the sound of consequences being formally, irrevocably recorded. The 9:37 a.m. meeting did not end with an explosion. It ended with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a corporate execution. Sable, her face a mask of chalky rage, was silently escorted from the boardroom by 2 members of corporate security, who had been waiting on Eleanor Vance's signal. My father remained in his chair, a slumped, defeated old man. Finally understanding the chasm between his illusions and my reality, James Abernathy adjourned the meeting, his final look at me one of grim professional approval. The rest of my day was spent in back-to-back meetings with Eleanor Vance and the newly appointed external investigation team, handing over every piece of data, every file, every password to the shadow ledger. At 4 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was my father. His text was a desperate plea, cloaked in the language of a command. "Dinner, my house, 7 p.m. We are going to fix this. Nora, as a family, be there. Fix this, not address this, or understand this. Fix it." He still believed this was a problem of optics, a simple crack in the facade that could be spackled over with a performance of family. He was predictable. I knew exactly what this would be. Not a reconciliation, but a trap, an attempt to ambush me emotionally, to surround me with family allies, to pressure me into recanting or showing mercy. For the good of the Kincaid name, he would be staging a show of unity, and he would have invited an audience. I replied with a single word. "Fine." The drive to Everlyn Heights felt like moving backward in time. I left my minimalist, steel and glass condo in the city's pulsing heart and drove up into the hills, to the sprawling, mock Tudor estate my mother had decorated and my father had filled with ghosts. It was a house built on appearances, with rolling lawns manicured to within an inch of their life and windows that were always spotlessly clean, reflecting the sky but revealing nothing of the interior. I arrived at 7 p.m. precisely. I was not empty-handed. I carried a single, slim gift box, wrapped in elegant, matte black paper with a simple silver ribbon. The front door was opened by the housekeeper, her eyes wide with a fear and pity I chose to ignore. The house was blazing with light, the scent of roast duck and expensive wine filling the air. It was a party. My father, in his favorite velvet smoking jacket, was standing by the grand fireplace, a glass of scotch in his hand. Sable was at his side. Her transformation was remarkable. The furious, cornered animal from the boardroom was gone. In her place was a victim. She was dressed in a soft, cream-colored cashmere dress. Her hair was down, her makeup minimal, designed to make her look pale and fragile. There was even a faint, artful blotchiness around her eyes, as if she had been weeping for hours. She was playing the part of the wronged wife, the victim of a cold, ambitious stepdaughter. And as I predicted, they had an audience, my father's sister, my Aunt Lydia, who had always viewed me with suspicion, 2 of my father's oldest business partners, men who had known him since before I was born and who valued loyalty above all else, and what tucked near the buffet were the coincidental guests, a reporter from Everlyn Crest Business Life and a photographer from a local high society blog. They were here to document the reconciliation, to write the story of how the powerful Kincaid family had weathered a minor internal dispute and emerged stronger than ever. "Nora, darling," my father said, his voice artificially warm as he strode forward to kiss the air near my cheek. "Thank you for coming. We were all so worried about you." Worried? I asked, my voice light. I looked past him at Sable, who was clinging to his other arm, her eyes downcast. I seemed to be the only one who had a productive day at the office. Aunt Lydia made a tisking sound. "Nora, please, your father has been through enough." "Of course," I said. I moved toward Sable, holding out the black gift box. "Sable, I brought you something. A welcome back gift, of a sort, for your time off." Sable looked at my father, who nodded encouragement. This was part of their script. Nora, the aggressor, makes the first gesture of peace. She took the box, her hand slightly trembling, an excellent touch. She slowly pulled the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was a single document. It was bound in a heavy cardstock cover, embossed with the Archwell Dynamics logo. It was a freshly printed copy of the new, revised, and board-ratified Corporate Code of Ethics, the very one I had finalized with Eleanor Vance 2 weeks ago. Sable picked it up, her brow furrowed in confusion. Her eyes scanned the cover page, and then the first line of the executive summary, which I had ensured was in a large, clear font. Her voice was a faint whisper as she read it aloud. "Zero tolerance for intimidation, harassment, or misuse of company assets by any employee, officer, or associate." She looked up at me, her fragile mask cracking, the confusion giving way to the first flicker of pure, unadulterated hatred. The society reporter edged closer, sensing a story, though not the one she was invited for. "I just wanted you to have the most up-to-date version," I said, my voice pleasant. "Since you'll have so much time for reading." My father stepped in, his face darkening. "Nora, that's enough. We are here tonight as a family. We are here to heal, to show our friends," he gestured to the partners and reporters, "that we are united." "You're right, Father," I said, my tone shifting to one of earnest sincerity. "You're absolutely right. Unity, family values. In fact, I've been thinking a lot about that today, about the values that hold a family and a family business together. Values like transparency, honesty, accountability." I turned to the room at large, projecting my voice slightly. "If you'll all indulge me for just a moment, I'd like to make a short speech, just to clear the air, about the value of family in business." The reporter looked thrilled. My father looked wary, but he couldn't very well refuse a public speech about family values. He nodded, a tight, forced gesture. "Thank you," I said. I walked over to the large 90-inch television mounted above the fireplace, which was currently displaying a muted football game. I pulled a small adapter from my pocket and connected my phone. I find a visual aid often helps to ground these concepts in reality. The football game vanished, replaced by my phone's lock screen. I navigated to my media folder. "This is just a little something I've been working on," I said. "A case study, if you will, in corporate conduct. It's about what happens when we forget those core values." I pressed play. There was no music, no dramatic introduction, just the raw, grainy footage from Graybridge Social. The sound, piped through the expensive home theater system, was shockingly clear. She's the definition of dead weight. The clinking of glasses in the room stopped. The air temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Smack. The sound of the blow was obscene in the polite, fire-lit room. Aunt Lydia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The society reporter's jaw went slack. The photographer, instinctively, raised his camera, the flash popping, catching the horrified expressions of the guests as they stared at the screen. On the TV, my head snapped to the side, and then my own voice, cold and clear, filled the room. 8:17 p.m. Thank you for the timestamp. I let the clip play for 5 more seconds, 5 seconds of my father's frozen silence, of Sable's sneering face, before I stopped it, freezing the frame on her triumphant, ugly expression. Someone, one of the partners, dropped his fork. The clatter against the hardwood floor was like a gunshot. "Nora," my father roared, Finally finding his voice, he lunged for the television, his face purple with rage. "What is the meaning of this? Turn it off! Turn it off now!" "Why?" I asked, my voice calm, projecting easily over his shouts. "It's just a domestic matter, isn't it? I thought we were here to fix this. I'm just providing context. I'm being transparent. I thought we should talk about this in the light, where everyone can see." "You—" Sable was trembling. Her fragile victim mask shattered, revealing the snarling fury beneath. "You planned this!" "I planned for accountability," I corrected her. "You planned the assault." My father was fumbling with the remote, trying to shut off the screen. "You are destroying this family!" he yelled. "No, Father," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm exposing it. There's a difference." The room was in chaos. The partners were backing away, as if from a live wire. The reporter was furiously scribbling in her notepad. Aunt Lydia looked as if she was about to faint. "I think," a new voice said from the doorway, "that exposing is exactly the right word." The chaos stopped. Everyone turned. James Abernathy stood in the grand archway of the dining room. He was not in a tuxedo. He was in his severe, dark business suit. He looked at the scene, the frozen image of violence on the TV, my father's enraged face, Sable's pure hatred, the stunned guests, and his expression was one of profound, icy disgust. He had not been invited by my father. He had been invited by me. My text, sent an hour before. "My father is hosting a reconciliation dinner with press. 7 p.m. You might want to be here as a representative of the board, as a family friend." My father stared at him, his mouth opening and closing. The color drained from his face. The authority he wielded in this house, the power of the patriarch, evaporated in an instant. The stage he had built to trap me had just been commandeered by a federal judge. I looked at my father, at Sable, and then at the shocked faces of the guests. I offered them a small, tight smile. "Now," I said, "we can talk." James Abernathy's presence had the effect of a chemical agent, neutralizing the chaos and replacing it with a thick, formal dread. The reporters, sensing a tectonic shift in the story, stood frozen, their pens and cameras momentarily forgotten. My father looked as if he'd been struck, his face a mess of confusion and dawning horror. This was no longer his house, no longer his party. It was a boardroom, and he was no longer in charge. "James," my father stammered, "what are you doing here?" "Nora invited me," Abernathy said, his voice flat. He stepped fully into the room, and behind him, as if on cue, was Eleanor Vance. Her face was a study in legal severity. As this appeared to be an unofficial, corporate-hosted event involving a matter of acute interest to the board, we felt our presence was prudent. I took a step forward, my back to the horrifying, frozen image on the television. "Thank you for coming, James, Eleanor. I was just about to move from the presentation of the problem to the proposal of the solution." I turned my attention from the screen to the people in the room. I spoke not to my father or to Sable, but to James Abernathy and the other board-affiliated partners. My voice was calm, measured, the tone I used when presenting a quarterly earnings report. It was the voice of a chief operating officer. "What you have witnessed tonight, and what the board was made aware of this morning, are not isolated incidents," I began. "They are symptoms of a systemic failure in governance, stemming from a fundamental conflict of interest at the highest level of this company, a conflict my mother foresaw." At the mention of my mother, a flicker of something, anger, pain, crossed my father's face. Sable just stared, her eyes narrowed with hate. "My mother was many things," I continued. "She was a brilliant chemist who developed Archwell's foundational patents. She was also a pragmatist. She understood that family and business, when improperly mixed, could become toxic, and she understood my father's vulnerabilities, which is why, before she died, she established a legal instrument to protect her legacy and the company she helped build. Eleanor, you have the file?" Eleanor Vance stepped forward, holding a slim leather portfolio. "I do," she confirmed. I had it retrieved from the corporate vault this afternoon and have spent the last several hours confirming its complete and total legality. She opened the portfolio. It is a voting trust agreement, established upon her death. It concerns her entire personal holding in Archwell Dynamics, a block of shares amounting to 18% of the total voting stock. A quiet gasp came from one of the business partners. 18% was a massive, king-making share block. It had always been assumed that my father voted those shares. The terms of the trust are simple, I explained, taking over from Eleanor. By default, the voting rights of those shares were assigned to the sitting CEO, my father. However, my mother included a specific and, until today, dormant conditional clause, a failsafe, she called it. I looked directly at my father, forcing him to meet my gaze. The clause stipulates that the full and irrevocable voting rights of that 18% block are to be immediately transferred to me, her sole heir, upon the fulfillment of one of three conditions. I held up a finger. 1. Clear and documented evidence of physical violence or credible threats of violence perpetrated by a member of the CEO's immediate family who holds a position of influence within the company. I gestured to the television. Condition met at 8:17 p.m. last night. I held up a second finger. 2. Clear and documented evidence of financial malfeasance or embezzlement of corporate funds by that same family member. I nodded toward Eleanor's portfolio, which now also contained David Sterling's complete audit. Condition met and confirmed by external audit this morning. I let the words hang in the air. I won't trouble you with the third condition. We have more than met the threshold. I turned back to Eleanor. Ms. Vance, as the board's general counsel, can you confirm the legal status of this agreement? Eleanor's voice was like ice. The trust document is ironclad. The evidence presented, both the digital recording of the assault and the preliminary findings of the audit into the Brindleport LLC, fully satisfies the conditions of the transfer clause. As of my legal review at 5:00 p.m. today, the voting rights for all 18% of the shares held in the Kincaid Family Trust are now legally and exclusively controlled by Ms. Nora Kincaid. The room was utterly silent. Sable looked at my father, a frantic, desperate expression on her face. Richard? What is she talking about? This is insane. My father just shook his head, looking old and lost. He had known about the trust, of course, but he had likely forgotten the details, viewing it as a sentimental relic, not a loaded gun. What this means, James Abernathy said, stepping forward to take control, is that the governance of this company has now materially changed. The 18% controlled by Nora, combined with the 34% held by the independent directors and institutional investors I represent, constitutes a clear majority. We have the votes to call a special resolution, right here, right now. This was it, the final turn of the key. I have such a resolution to propose, I said. Effective immediately, I move that the board takes the following actions. First, that Sable Kincaid's role at this company is not suspended, but permanently terminated. Her severance, if any, will be determined by the findings of the fraud investigation. Second, I continued, my voice gaining strength, I move that the entire budget for the CSR and PR departments be frozen, pending a full forensic accounting. No expenditure over $1,000 is to be approved without the sign-off of the acting COO and the chairman of the board. Third, I move that we formally retain David Sterling's firm to conduct that forensic audit and a company-wide review of our internal financial controls. I paused, letting the corporate guillotine fall. Then, I delivered the final, most personal cut. And one last thing, I move that the informal, discretionary Kincaid family stipend be immediately and permanently eliminated from the corporate budget. All future family-related business expenses must be submitted through standard, itemized channels, subject to the same scrutiny as any other employees. A wave of murmurs rippled through the guests. The stipend was a legendary piece of Archwell history, an uncapped, unaudited allowance for the CEO's family. It was my father's slush fund, and in Sable's hands, it had become the source of her untraceable power and opulent lifestyle. Cutting it off was more than a financial move. It was an act of profound personal amputation. Sable finally found her voice, a strangled, incredulous shriek. "You can't! You're destroying this family! This is our life!" I turned to her, and for the first time, I let a sliver of the cold fury I felt show in my eyes. I took a half-step closer to her, close enough that the reporters couldn't quite hear. But my phone, sitting on a nearby table and still recording audio, could— "No," I said, my voice a low, intense whisper. "The foundation was rotten. I'm just rebuilding the load-bearing walls." I stepped back. The drama of her outburst was irrelevant. This was now a matter of procedure. James Abernathy's voice boomed through the room, cutting through the whispers. "We will now have an informal but binding vote of the controlling interests, all in favor of the 4 resolutions proposed by Ms. Kincaid. Signify by raising your hand." He raised his hand. The 2 other business partners, their faces pale but their survival instincts sharp, saw the tide had turned. After a moment's hesitation, their hands went up. My hand went up. "The resolutions are passed," Abernathy declared, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. "It's done." The hands remained in the air, a stark, frozen tableau in the overwarm, opulent room. James Abernathy's hand, etched with the veins of age and authority. The 2 partners' hands, raised with the reluctant speed of men choosing the winning side. And my own, steady and pale. 4 hands, representing a new, unassailable majority. "The resolutions are passed," Abernathy declared again, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. He lowered his hand. The partners did the same, as if relieved the gesture was over. "It's done." It was not a shout, but a verdict. The word hung in the air. Absolute. My father stared at the empty space where the hands had been, his entire body seeming to deflate, the illusion of his patriarchal power dissolving in real time. Sable, however, was a different animal. The shock solidified, not into defeat, but into a venomous, cornered rage. "You can't do this," she hissed, her voice a low, vibrating threat. "This is my home. You can't vote me out of my own home." "On the contrary, Mrs. Kincaid," Eleanor Vance said, her voice cool and practiced. She took a step forward, holding her tablet. "This event, as per the invitations and the corporate accounts that paid for the catering, was officially designated as a corporate function for key partners and press. As such, this property is, for the duration of the event, a corporate-hosted environment. The board has every right to remove a terminated non-employee individual who poses a security and liability risk." Eleanor's precision was a separate kind of violence, clean and inescapable, as if summoned by her words. The grand front doors of the estate opened, not with a rush, but with a quiet, hydraulic smoothness. 2 men stood in the entryway. They were not Archwell security. They were larger, calmer, dressed in dark, impeccably tailored suits with no logo. They looked like the kind of men who protect diplomats. They scanned the room, their eyes noting the guests, the reporters, before landing, with polite finality, on Sable. One of them stepped forward. His voice was soft, almost kind. "Mrs. Kincaid, we've been asked by the board's counsel to provide an escort for you, if you'll come with us, please." He did not say, "You have to leave." He said, "If you'll come with us." It was the language of immovable, courteous force. Sable looked from the man, to Eleanor, to my father, who still sat, frozen, in his chair. "Richard!" she screamed, the sound finally cracking. "Richard, do something! Don't let them do this!" My father slowly raised his head. He looked at her, his eyes dead. "There's nothing to do," he whispered. "It's done." The 2 men moved forward, not touching her, but flanking her, their presence creating an invisible field of pressure. She was being herded, gently but irreversibly, toward the door. The guests, my aunt, the partners, the reporters, shrank back, parting to create a clear path for her exit. My father's hand, resting on the arm of his chair, was trembling violently. He watched her go, his breath coming in shallow rasps. As she reached the threshold, he turned his gaze at last to me. I had not moved. I was standing by the cold fireplace, watching the procedure. His voice was a hollow shell. "Nora, you planned this, all of it. The meeting, the trust, Abernathy." He wasn't accusing. He was just seeing. I gave him the truth, the one I had held on to for years. "No, I planned for order," I said, my voice quiet. "This is just what order looks like." At the doorway, Sable stopped. She was shaking with a fury that was almost preternatural. She turned, her face a contorted mask of hatred, her eyes fixed on me. "I will get you for this," she spat, her voice low and raw. "I will have my revenge. I will destroy you, you ungrateful little bitch." I looked at her. I felt nothing. No fear, no pity, no triumph. Just an immense, cold finality. I walked the few steps that separated us. Stopping just outside of her reach, I looked directly into her eyes. "You're wrong about ungrateful. Sable," I said, my voice so low only she and the security men could hear. "I was the one who filed the affidavit for your green card. I was the one who signed as your sponsor. That was gratitude. For my father's happiness. You tried to turn that gratitude into a weapon to use against me." I held her gaze, not letting her look away. This time, it broke. Her face crumpled. That one truth, the reminder of her origin, of her debt, hit her harder than the video, harder than the vote. It was the one fact she could not spin. One of the security men gently placed a hand on her elbow. "Ma'am, this way." She didn't resist further. She just went, a puppet with its strings cut, disappearing into the dark of the entryway. The front door remained open. A gust of cold October wind, the night wind from the Everland Hills, blew into the house. It rustled the silk curtains, made the flames in the fireplace dance wildly, and chilled the overheated room. The scent of pine and damp earth temporarily overpowered the smell of roast duck. In the heavy, stunned silence, the only sound was the fluttering of the drapes. Then, a new sound, sharp and intrusive, the chime of the doorbell. Everyone flinched. Eleanor Vance, ever prepared, looked toward the door. A moment later, a man in a weatherproof courier uniform stepped inside, holding a large, waterproof document satchel. He looked around at the funereal scene with professional indifference. "Package for Ms. Eleanor Vance, requiring signature," he said. Eleanor stepped forward, signed the digital pad, and took the satchel. The courier nodded and left, disappearing as quickly as he'd arrived. As the door swung shut, it revealed the scene outside the estate's main gates, a cluster of flashing lights. The society reporters, now on public property, had been joined by others, real news vans. The photographer's flash popped. A sharp, distant burst of light, like heat lightning. The story was already out. I turned away from the window. I had no interest in the flashes. They were part of the chaos, and I was done with chaos. Eleanor was opening the satchel. She pulled out a thick-bound document. She looked at the cover, then at her watch. "It's 10:12 p.m., she announced to the room, "and this is the official, court-stamped notification of the independent investigation to be delivered to all named parties." She looked at my father, then placed the document on the table. "The machine is already working. Richard." I walked back to the table where Sable had left her gift. The box was empty, the black tissue paper crumpled. I picked up the pristine, bound copy of the Archwell Code of Ethics. I folded it slowly, deliberately, not creasing it, but tucking it neatly back into its original shape. Then, I placed it back into the empty gift box and slid the lid on. It was clean. It was finished.